All right, class, we're going to continue with chapter 7. Remember chapter 6? The ants, Sponge and Spiker, started noticing that peach was growing. First, they wanted James to pick it so they could eat it and share it between the two of them and say, "You don't get any, James." And it keeps growing. So, let's see what's going to happen next. And I want you to think, what are the problems going on in the story so far? Usually with the long chapter books, there's more than one problem. And also, let's think of the feelings. How do you think James is feeling in certain parts? And what's going on with the minds of Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker? What are they thinking? What's the thinking going on? So, chapter 7. The two women and the small boy, the ants, and James, stood absolutely still in the grass underneath the tree, gazing up at the extraordinary fruit. James's little face was glowing with excitement. His eyes were as big and bright as two stars. He could see the peach swelling larger and larger, as clearly as if it were a balloon being blown up. In a half a minute, it was the size of a melon. In another half a minute, it was twice as big. Just looking, just look at it growing, Aunt Spiker cried. Oh, will it ever stop? Aunt Sponge shouted, waving her fat arms and starting to dance around in circles. Oh, so maybe she's happy here. Oh, will it ever stop? And now it was so big it looked like an enormous butter-colored pumpkin dangling from the top of the tree. Get away from that tree trunk, you stupid boy, Aunt Spiker yelled. The slightest shake and I'm sure it will fall off. It must weigh 20 or 30 pounds at least. The branch that the peach was growing upon was beginning to bend over further and further because of its weight. Oh, stand back, Aunt Sponge shouted. It's coming down. So to remind you what it looks like. Oh, no, not to remind you. To show you. That's what it's looking like right now. So we've got the tree and the branch is bending, and peach is getting bigger. It's also behind me. Right there. Woo, woo. Yeah. So continue. The branch is going to break. But the branch didn't break. It simply bent over more and more as the peach got heavier and heavier. And still it went on growing. In another minute, this mammoth fruit was as large and round and fat as Aunt Sponge herself, and probably just as heavy. I want to pause really quick in that moment. Mammoth. Maybe you don't know what the word mammoth is, but by reading this sentence, you can kind of get an idea. It's comparing the fruit with somebody that we know. So mammoth fruit was as large and round and fat as Aunt Sponge herself. We know Aunt Sponge is big, and now they're comparing the fruit with Aunt Sponge, so mammoth must mean big. Look it up if you're not too sure. It has to stop now, Aunt Spiker yelled. It can't go on forever. But it didn't stop. Soon it was the size of a small car, and it reached halfway to the ground. Both ants were now hopping around and around the tree, clapping their hands and shouting all sorts of silly things in their excitement. So think of the ants. How are they feeling right now? Towards James, towards the peach, towards life? How are those ants feeling? Hallelujah! Aunt Spiker shouted. What a peach! What a peach! Terrifico! Aunt Sponge cried out. Magnifico! Splendifico! What a meal! It's still growing! I know. As for James, he was so spellbound by the whole thing that he could only stand and stare and murmur quietly to himself, Oh, isn't it beautiful? It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Ah, shut up, you little twerp, Aunt Spiker snapped, happening to overhear him. It's none of your business. That's right, Aunt Sponge declared. It's got nothing to do with you whatsoever. Keep out of it. Look, Aunt Spiker shouted. It's growing faster than ever now. It's speeding up. I see it, Spiker. I do. Bigger and bigger grew the peach, bigger and bigger and bigger. Then at last, when it had become nearly as tall as a tree that it was growing on, as tall and wide, in fact, as a small house, the bottom part of it gently touched the ground, and that is where it rested. There's our peach tree. Check it out. It can't fall off. It can't. Oh, it can't fall off now. Aunt Sponge shouted. It stopped growing. Aunt Spiker cried. No, it hasn't. Yes, it has. It's slowing down, Spiker. It's slowing down, but it hasn't stopped yet. You watch it. There was a pause. It has now. I believe you're right. Do you think it's safe to touch it? I don't know. We'd better be careful. So this must have been earlier on when the branch was bending, not what it looks like now, because we just heard that it's on the ground. Right now it's not on the ground. So this picture must have been earlier. Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker began walking slowly around the peach, inspecting it very cautiously from all sides. They were like a couple of hunters who had just shot an elephant and were not quite sure whether it was dead or alive, and the massive round fruit towered over them so high that they looked like midgets from another world beside it. The skin of the peach was very beautiful, a rich buttery yellow with patches of brilliant pink and red. Aunt Sponge advanced cautiously, so slowly, she was a little bit worried. She didn't know what was going to happen, and touched it with the tip of her finger. It's ripe. It's just perfect. Now see here, Spiker. Why don't we go and get us a shovel right away and dig a great big hunk out of it for you and for me to eat? No, Aunt Spiker said. Not yet. Why ever not? Because I say so. But I can't wait to eat some, Aunt Sponge cried out. She was watering at the mouth, and a thin trickle of spit was running down the side of her chin. My dear Sponge, Aunt Spiker said slowly, winking at her sister and smiling a sly, thin-lipped smile. There's a pile of money to be made out of this if only we can handle it right. You wait and see. So, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker, they got this big old massive peach. James is just thinking, wow, this is crazy. How are they feeling? How's Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker feeling? They kind of went up and down, and James wasn't really so much into this chapter. What do you think it sounds like they have an idea right here, or at least Aunt Spiker has an idea. What do you think that idea is going to be? And we will figure out when I read the next one, chapter 8. Hope you enjoyed. Toodles.